thank you all for joining us today. I'm Liz Harris. I'm with BikeWalkKC, and this is our session called Intersections of Neighborhood Health. We are really excited to have Dina Newman join us today, and we will get started with that very soon. The pandemic is accelerating many trends and some big changes that were already in motion. Our series is a conversation with leaders in Kansas City about how that acceleration is happening here locally for the transportation, health, equity, and sustainability issues that are core to BikeWalkKC's mission, as well as the intersectional items that often overlap with our work. So things like racism, housing, economic development, and more. We're really excited to have you join us today. We appreciate our funders for giving us the flexibility to offer these trainings and these learnings and these conversations for our community. And we are really grateful for you all to join us. If you like, you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. You'll find it down there with a little speech bubble. You can tell us who you are and where you're from and why you're here. You can find over to the left at the bottom of your screen, you'll find a mute button. Since we have such a big group, we're going to start off with everybody on mute right now, just to make sure that we can get through our program. You'll also find the stop video just to the right of that. And in that chat box, please feel free also to drop any comments or questions you have. I'll be collecting those as Eric Rogers and Dina Newman have their conversation, and then we can talk about those later in the question and answer session. Without any further ado, here is Eric Rogers, Executive Director of BikeWalkKC, and he's going to start us off.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome everybody. We're going to dive right into it. And so, Dina, I'm going to ask you to just give us a brief overview of what is the Center for Neighborhoods, how you got into this type of work. Looks like we've got a lot of friendly faces here, but there probably are some folks that maybe don't know everything about the center. So want to start us off with just a little overview of what the center does?
All right, well, the Center for Neighborhoods was created in 2015. We actually opened our doors in 2016. We are a part of UMKC Architecture, Urban Planning and Design. We're in that department. The center was created by former Senator Kiki Curls, and Dr. Jacob Wagner is the co-founder of the center. And it was created basically out of a community need. There was a survey that went out to over 100 different neighborhood leaders across the city, and they asked the question, you know, what do you need to help build capacity in your neighborhood organization? And what we kept hearing was 4 main areas. We need help with leadership and governance. And that's everything from, you know, how to do bylaws to exploring if your neighborhood association wants to be a 501c3. The other thing that they wanted help on was tech and communications. You know, digital equity is still very real here in Kansas City. There are many neighborhoods that are still struggling just to have basic internet service. They wanted help with planning and development, and that's everything from, you know, my neighborhood is being gentrified to, you know, how do we deal with, you know, city government when it comes to planning. And then the fourth piece that they, which is kind of my heart, is health and safety. Those were the areas that they really needed help in. So the center was created to kind of work with those 4 areas. We provide a free 12-week training for neighborhood leaders and advocates and residents. We teach them 3 hours a night, 1 night a week for 12 weeks. And we call them cohorts. And I see some of our cohort members are on the call. And basically they are taught to build capacity in their own neighborhood organization. And depending on the neighborhood, it looks very, very different. But for the most part, you know, they're looking at issues, social determinants of health in the community. They're looking at, you know, crime and safety. And, you know, those are the things that run across all neighborhoods. I don't care where you live. There's crime in your neighborhood. It's just not always amplified all over the news. A lot of times it's happening behind closed doors. You know, issues with youth, affordability for housing, health. All those issues are the things that we work on in, as we empower, engage, and equip these neighborhood leaders to be able to go back and do the work in their community. So we've had 8 cohorts. We say 7.5 because we were in the middle of cohort 8 when COVID hit. So we had to pivot and make some changes. But since we opened, we've had over 170 neighborhood leaders come through our program, representing 70 different neighborhoods across the city.
And so, Dina, how did you get into this role? You were doing neighborhood work before this, right?
Yeah, so I'm not an academic. I say that right off the bat. I kind of consider myself like Jane Jacobs. I don't have an academic pedigree, but I've been working in community for a long time, probably over 25 years in one capacity or the other, as a volunteer or doing the work as a paid employee. My job before I came to the Center for Neighborhoods was I was with the Ivanhoe Neighborhood Council. I was the Health Initiatives Manager, Advocate for Change, and that's where I really kind of sharpened my skills and really developed that passion for neighborhood work.
Thank you. That's a great overview. Another kind of overview I want to talk about to give us a foundation for the conversation is, what is the concept of neighborhood health? So there's a lot of things that go into it. You know, a lot of what we work on at BikeWalkKC are things around physical activity, connectivity, mobility. So I know a lot of folks on the call probably know about those things, but there are a whole lot more factors that determine neighborhood health. What are some of the major components of neighborhood health in your mind right now?
So, you know, when we talk about what does it take to have a healthy community, we're talking holistically. We're talking not just physical health. We're looking at the neighborhood as a whole, and it depends on who you talk to, what they consider a healthy neighborhood. I think planners may have one definition, funders may have another definition, but people who live in the community, they have their own definition of what a healthy neighborhood is as well. But for the sake of the conversation, I think let's agree that the 6 basic elements of a healthy neighborhood are economic stability. And that includes, you know, paid living wages, jobs in the community, accessibility to affordable, healthy, culturally relevant food, quality, affordable health care. Mother Hakima Payne has termed a coin called culturally congruent care. I think that plays a very important part of quality, affordable care. Environmental equity, and that's, you know, clean air, clean water, land that's not contaminated, green spaces, safe places for you and your family. Quality educational opportunities, and then quality neighborhood life. And that means, you know, affordable, and I'm going to say dignified housing. There's affordable housing that's not necessarily dignified housing. So quality, affordable, dignified housing, social cohesion with family, friends, with faith-based organizations and your neighbors. So that's broadly what I consider a healthy neighborhood. And given all of those elements, it's a process. It is a process that takes a long time sometimes to create a healthy neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. So as I'm listening to all of those elements of neighborhood health you're talking about, I can think of each one and how they're probably being impacted by the pandemic. You know, the first one that came to mind was the social cohesion, and you know, we're today attempting to try to keep some of that just with the group here through these virtual ways. But could you talk a little bit about, as you say, it's a process. What has the pandemic done to that process for some of those factors. You know, I'm going to assume that for a lot of those, it's had a negative impact, but maybe there are things where there's been a positive. So good or bad, what are you seeing in the neighborhoods you work with? Things that were already in progress, but are now being impacted by what's going on today?
Well, you know, I think in some ways what's been happening, so let me back up first. There are over 240 plus neighborhoods in Kansas City, Missouri. That's north, south, east, and west, and that's a lot of different neighborhoods. And each neighborhood, you know, have their own distinct flavor, if you will. You know, they behave differently, they act differently. There's different elements that make up that neighborhood. So depending on which neighborhood we're talking about, and the Center for Neighborhoods work with all neighborhoods. We're not, you know, geographically bound to one little area in town. It's all neighborhoods across Kansas City, Missouri. So my default is, when I'm talking about neighborhoods, is to go to my communities of concern. And I'm trying to get away from labeling, because when you begin to label certain neighborhoods and people, you fall into that racist history, right? So I'm really trying to be careful about that, but I call them communities of concern. And these are communities that typically have low wealth, poor health outcomes, struggling with affordable housing, right? And it's not always communities of color. So when I'm talking about communities of concern, that's what I'm talking about. And again, my default is typically to go to those communities because they're the ones struggling the most. However, we work with affluent neighborhoods that are doing well. Before the pandemic, there were neighborhoods that were really focused on youth, for example. And they were gearing up to do programming for the summer. And they were working with schools. And then the pandemic happened and folks had to shift. And now there's homeschooling. And I will say, and I can say this because I homeschooled my kids for a while, homeschooling is not for the faint of heart. It is work. It is work. And for some people in some communities, it has really been a positive. For other neighborhoods, not so much so. You know, I'm concerned about the children who were struggling already in school, and then you had to shift, and now you're home, and you have parents who maybe are those essential workers. They're not home to homeschool. So you have a whole generation of kids. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to find out pretty soon how these children are doing. We've had neighborhoods who, before the pandemic, were really working in the environmental space, right? They were doing gardening. They were working on air quality. They were repurposing vacant lots. They were, you know, putting together farmers markets. Since pandemic, what we have seen, a lot of the farmers markets have closed, or they've had to change their model. And they're doing CSAs now. I see Diane Hirschberger on there with her farm. Things have changed in that space of healthy food, right? I just read something, I think it was from St. Louis, Washington University, that people who lost jobs since COVID, 34% are food insecure. We've been getting calls at Center for Neighborhoods. People are looking for healthy, affordable food. So food banks have increased. That's one thing that has increased out of this pandemic. Neighborhoods were going after grants. We've helped, Center for Neighborhoods helped a lot of neighborhoods write grants, and they were getting funding. And then all of a sudden things shifted, and it was like, oops, hold on. We're going to put everything we have behind COVID. So these are some of the things that were happening in neighborhood before COVID. Neighborhood cleanups. This is the time of year big neighborhood cleanups take place. And before, a lot of neighborhoods were relying on volunteers. You would get volunteers from organizations that would come out in mass, right, to help clean up a neighborhood. Not so much now. We're starting to see where, you know, the neighborhood cleanups are, you know, smaller and not as frequent. So those are some of the challenges that have come out of the pandemic, but also their opportunities. And that's what we tell our neighborhood leaders in class. We use the ABCD, asset-based community development mindset, because most neighborhoods know the challenges. They already know those. In fact, they've been rewarded to a certain degree for how bad can it be, we'll give you more money. So what we flip the script with our leaders and we tell them, okay, you know the challenges, but let's focus on the assets in the community and let's build off of that. And what we have seen are some amazing outcomes with some of the neighbors, taking this to the next level as far as, you know, connecting with other neighborhoods, pulling together resources. We've seen some of that happen.
So ABCD, can you go through that again real quick? What does that stand for?
Asset-based community development. And it's the methodology created by John McKnight and Jody Kretzman out of St. Paul University. It's been around for a while. Some people, you know, call it asset mapping, but it's more to that. It's really looking, again, at the assets in the community and building off of those. And when I say assets, we're talking people, places, and things. And I'll give you an example. Like when I was with Ivanhoe, we had some health issues in the community. And, you know, we were looking at, well, how can we get just basic blood pressure checks in the community? And we received funding, thanks Health Forward Foundation. Those folks are amazing, to address that issue. And we looked at the neighborhood first, and we found that there are retired nurses in the community. There are retired doctors in the community, retired teachers, right? These are assets in your community that the neighborhood leaders are starting to connect with and realize these are the folks that can help us address some of the issues. So we had a retired nurse sit there in the office and take blood pressure checks for, you know, 2 days a week. We gave her a $25 stipend, which may not be a lot of money to you and I, but for some people, $25 go a long way. I help pay a bill. And it shows that you value that neighborhood leader's voice and expertise. We really push that because we believe the leaders are already in the room. Neighborhood leaders, advocates, residents, they're experts at what they do. A lot of times they're not asked to the table. We provide not only the chair, but in some cases we provide the table for neighborhood leaders to be able to voice their opinion. We strongly suggest community-led projects because those are the projects that will last. You know, you come in, you put money behind something, you get your outcomes, you do your report, you go away, and the community's still sitting there when it's all said and done, still trying to figure it out. But when you bring neighborhood leaders in at the beginning to help do this work, you know, we firmly believe that there's going to be a true investment in that work and it's going to be sustainable.
Yeah, so Dina, I'm really kind of struck by, as you're talking about all the things that are going on, just how often it's really the neighborhoods that are providing services and functions that, you know, you may think of as something that the city should be doing or you know, a health agency, because you're talking about blood pressure checks and cleanups and organizing youth activities. I mean, that's something that's probably not everybody really understands, just how much the neighborhoods are doing. You know, not just holding that monthly meeting, but actually providing a lot of services and, you know, assistance for folks.
You know, and that's what we talk about, Eric. We say, you know, what makes a good neighbor, right? And some people have been caught up in that idea of, I have to attend my neighborhood meeting to be a good neighbor. Well, that's not necessarily true. I know folk who never attended a neighborhood meeting, but they know if that neighbor across the street is sick. and they will go down the street and get the neighborhood's newspapers because that neighbor is out of town. And they're keeping an eye on the little boy across the street as he's out playing. Those are good. That's what make good neighbors, right? And this is happening every single day in every neighborhood. Neighborhood leaders are not paid. I don't think I know of any, really, maybe just a handful that are paid. Most are volunteers. Most neighborhood organizations are meeting in shared space. They're meeting in a church basement. They're meeting at the police station. Very few have paid staff or brick and mortar facility. And that's part of the reason the Center for Neighborhoods was created, because people were saying, and I say this with all love and respect because I did work at Ivanhoe, people were saying we're not Ivanhoe. Depending on who you talk to, some people feel Ivanhoe was the gold standard. But Ivanhoe had Mr. James B. Nutter as an angel investor. It had the incredible Margaret May, who was a director, had folks like Jesse Jefferson, who were, you know, and Alan and Yolanda Young. A lot of neighborhoods don't have that. They're building that capacity to be at that place. But in the meantime, they're working hard. They are working hard. And I am an advocate for, you know, funders and organizations to help support these neighborhoods at that level. I'm all about providing stipends. I think if I'm going to spend an hour with you and pick your brain, your time is as valuable as my time. And then you need to be compensated for that. You know, when we have meetings, when we have our training sessions, we provide a meal. We're not giving them chips and cookies. We're providing the family a full meal, right? That's the least you can do. When you're engaging community, feed them. If they need childcare, give them a stipend. If they need a bus pass, give them a bus pass. You know, what we found out with some of our elderly, you know, there was like maybe one lady who actually still had a driver's license, and she was driving, but there were 6 other little ladies who wanted to come to the meeting. Well, she's going around picking up folk to bring them to class. Help Miss Jones with a gas card from Quick Trip. You know what I mean? Those are important things. That's what helped build community. And that's what helps empowers those neighborhood leaders to go do this hard, messy, sometimes wicked work, right?
So, you know, in terms of the assets, you were talking about some of your work now with the neighborhoods is helping them think about what are the opportunities that may be presenting themselves during this. Do you have any examples or ways that you could think about that to try to come up with those opportunities? You know, I just in my own family, I've been, you know, I think about like trying to help my 90-something-year-old grandma learn about the internet and Zoom and all this stuff. And, you know, hearing stories of folks, you know, trying to find ways to go help the elders in the community stay involved and connected to people digitally. Are there things you're seeing in the neighborhoods you work with that are at least promising or encouraging?
Oh, absolutely. So you mentioned the whole internet thing. Of course, we had to move our classes online. And I've got to tell you, we were concerned about certain seniors. And it was like, oh boy, this is not going to be an easy transition. So on Tuesday nights, we still have our training sessions for cohorts 1 through 8. And I got to tell you, our senior folks are rocking it. They're getting on that Zoom call. Now, I will tell you, sometimes they're upside down. I don't know how they do that, but sometimes they are. Sometimes they're not, you can't hear them or you can't see them, but they are getting on these calls. And what is interesting out of that, some neighborhoods, particularly the ones that have a senior leadership, they don't meet in the winter and they don't meet, you know, when it starts getting dark early because they just don't want to go out. This Zoom platform has now provided a new opportunity. So I think going forward, they will reconsider how to meet in the winter and late at, when it's dark at 6 o'clock. So they will be able to continue to have those meetings. We've also seen, where neighborhoods again are coming together to pool resources, to work on, again, food equality, food access, pantries and churches, and, different folks are coming together to provide food. We're starting to see where, there's people are starting to reach out to each other and do the check-in. I know people who live alone, and I know people who are not, we talk about culture of health and neighborhood health. They're not aging in place well. I know of one gentleman who does not have an air conditioner, and it is hot. And I'm checking in with him every other day. There are neighbors who checking in with each other. One of the things we do at the Center for Neighborhoods, part of our cohort, is we do something called sisterhoods. And we pair 2 different neighborhoods together when they come into class. And they don't necessarily from the outside look like there's similarities. But once they get to know each other, they begin to see that most of the time they have much more in common than they have different. Sister neighborhoods are checking out with each other. And I'll quickly share a story, one of our favorite stories. There was a neighborhood that was primarily white. We paired them with a primarily Black neighborhood. This neighborhood, the white neighborhood, was north of the river. The Black neighborhood was south of the river. And they became sister neighborhoods. So over 12 weeks, they are to work with each other, meet with each other, go to each other's meetings, and get to know. Well, by the time it was all said and done, the white ladies up by the north of the river said to us, you know what, now when I watch the news and they talk about East Detroit's neighborhoods, that's no longer East Detroit's neighborhoods. That's Miss So-and-so's neighborhood. That's Mr. So-and-so's neighborhood. I know people now in that community. I have a connection with those folks in that community. And I probably would have never had that connection had not we been paired together. And that's the beauty and the purpose of the Sister Neighborhood program, because they become advocates for one another, but also they get to know each other. And that's what we're seeing. Folks are checking in with each other. Some folks are like, I'm not good at teaching math. Can you teach math? I know you're a retired teacher. Can we get on a Zoom call and you can help my kid? So we're seeing a lot of old-fashioned neighborhoodism, just folks getting back together and seeing where those gaps are and trying to help out each other.
That's really great to hear. I really like the idea of the sister neighborhoods. And, I feel like in a city like ours, it's so spread out and has so many different types of neighborhoods. It's really easy to go about your whole life and never encounter a different type of neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And really make those types of connections with people. And you really only see like what you see on the news about some neighborhoods. So I think that's really great and that's encouraging. So I want to go to one of the other factors we haven't yet talked about, but you mentioned earlier, was housing. And I think from what I'm hearing, at least in the news, again, the most urgent thing in the pandemic for a lot of folks is rent, and just being able to stay in their house or their apartment or wherever they're at through this. So I'm curious to know what you're hearing out in the neighborhoods right now. We've just had rent due about a week ago. And it's due again in another 3 weeks. How are folks doing? What are you hearing?
Well, you're right. The rent is due. And I'm afraid we're going to see a lot more unhoused people by the end of the month. I think the moratorium maybe was lifted or is getting ready to be lifted. I'm not sure exactly, but, this is a huge concern. It is a concern for people in the community. There are folks who have already lost their home or their apartment, and they've moved in with someone else, right? So now you have another added issue of, I don't know, family dysfunction, where there's more people in the house than there are bedrooms. And I'm telling you, that causes stress on a whole another level, right? You have people who've lost jobs, and they are going to lose their homes. So yeah, it's a huge concern. We're hearing about it. You know, we've partnered in the past with KC Tenants. One of our interns is actually very, very involved with them. We know Tara Raghaver. Yeah, these are issues that just won't go away overnight. And I'm really afraid, you know, I'm concerned after this fallout, what's going to happen as far as those who are unhoused. We already have an incredible homeless issue already in Kansas City. So, you know, I think we're going to see more of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it seems like we're finding that one of the factors in transmission of the virus is living in crowded living conditions, and as you're talking about people having to move in with others and situations getting more and more crowded, I can only imagine that's going to make it even more likely that more folks are going to get infected and get sick. Yeah.
Serious issue, because, you know, in some homes you have generations. There's grandkids, there's kids, you know, there's aunts and uncles. So yeah, and you know, it's a privilege. People forget it's a privilege to be able to say, you know, I'm going to work from home, or I'm going to shelter in place. That's a privilege for a lot of us. There are folks who have to go to work, you know, and we talk about, you know, God bless them, the doctors and the nurses and all, but there's also a disproportionate people of color who are emptying bedpans and wiping down walls. Those people are essential workers too. And those are the folks that have to go to work and maybe get on a bus because they don't have transportation and go home. And if they are infected, then they are exposing sometimes multi-generational groups in one home. These are issues that concern me, that concern our neighborhood leaders. And there are neighborhood leaders who are looking at this, working with council folk. You know, I know some 5th and 3rd district where COVID numbers are high. There are council district people who are working hard to hand out masks, to give out education. Center for Neighborhoods, we have something called News You Can Use. And we did a poll of our cohort members and asked, you know, what can we do during this time? What can we offer you that's the most valid information? And News You Can Use turned out to be one of those things. It's a weekly list of everything that's happening in the city, tips, help, resources. Erin Royals is on the call. Erin created a list of food pantries that she's always updating. We have what happened at City Hall this week. We send this out every Friday, and people wait for that information. And we're, again, tracking COVID numbers. We're talking about census. We're talking about voting, the issues that are important in our different communities. We're making sure we get that information out.
So Dina, where can folks get on that list, and where can they access any of the other resources at the Center for Neighborhoods?
So Liz, if you would put in the chat neighborhoods at umkc.edu. That is our kind of general email. My email, if you want to get in touch with me, mine is newmandi@umkc.edu. And I'm just going to do a quick plug. We just did our new website, which is cfn.umkc.edu. Brand new, spanking new website. We're pretty proud of it.
Okay, I see Erin just put the link there in the chat. So if you want to get to the website, you can check out the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Erin.
So I'm going to hand it back to Liz to kind of see what questions we've had from the audience so far. But Dina, before we do that, is there anything else that we should know that I haven't asked or we haven't talked about?
Well, we have to talk about, racial equity. We have, when we look at our neighborhoods, when you talk about neighborhoods, you're already talking about race. I will tell you, and I think there's some health folk on the call, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is kind of the leaders in the space of showing how where you live affects how well you live. You can go on to rwj.org, I believe, and type in zip code life expectancy. And again, I'm not a data want. Data doesn't tell the entire story, but I tell you, you can put in your zip code and it will tell you your life expectancy. And there's more to that behind that. Again, it's social determinants of health, it's systemic racism, it's institutional racism. If you live in a neighborhood that for years redlining and disinvestment occurred, you're going to see outcomes that we see in some of our neighborhoods. I will also say that, we have to look at, again, how to be a good neighbor, how to support our neighborhoods. I would ask everyone to, think about supporting your neighborhood organization. I'll think about supporting Center for Neighborhoods. We do this work. I love this work. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to do this work. But again, our neighborhood leaders, at the end of the day, if we're gone, that's their home. And they are still invested in those communities. And they need to be supported. Support us to help support them. We were part of the giant budget cut from higher education. The Center for Neighborhoods is looking for funding. We're looking for help. We're looking for support. Also, like I say, love your neighbor as yourself. Check on your neighbor. Make sure that, if someone's hungry, direct them to the food pantries, direct them to the areas where just your basic necessities of life are available.
Thank you,
like
Dina.
I've been on a soapbox, but there you go.
This is your soapbox. You've got a full hour to soapbox as much as you want.
Thank you.
So we do have a couple of questions. So far, both from Michael Kelly, actually. So please feel free, other folks, if you have questions, add them to the chat box and I'll keep those rolling for right now. Okay, so Michael Kelly asks, in your view, do you believe there is a disconnect at times in the metrics we use to measure healthy neighborhoods? At times, it seems like what leaders use and what residents use don't always align, and sometimes that can create tension.
Good question, Michael. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm trying to give you an example. I'm going to go back to when I was with Ivanhoe, and we were looking at how to put affordable, accessible food in the community. And we were looking at the land that was available in this neighborhood. And in fact, in some neighborhoods, there's still quite a bit of vacant land. But we were looking at the land, and the neighborhood ended up purchasing a vacant lot. And I had a great idea to start a garden. And it was like, there wasn't a full service grocery store in the neighborhood. So we were like, okay, we'll create a garden and we'll just grow our own food. And me, under a grant fund, thinking, okay, we're going to do this thing and we're just going to do it. And my first meeting, there were less than 10 people, and they were all over the age of 80. And I'm going, don't you want to grow food? And they were like, been there, done that already. That's hard work. That takes water. That takes energy. And I'm sitting there going, well, wait a minute. I've got a grant that says I'm going to grow this garden. But I didn't engage with the community ahead of time. And there was tension. And I've learned, and I think people are starting to learn, that you have neighborhood folk at the table at the very beginning, right? In the planning process. and have them help you develop the plan. Because the last thing you want is to put all time, resources, and energy into something that the neighborhood will not support. So yes, there's tension, but I think there's a way of working that out, working together to get around that. I hope I answered your question, Michael.
Okay, and his second question is, are there models from other cities you've seen where where funding the work and support services of neighborhood associations has been deployed effectively?
You broke up that last bit, Liz.
Oh, sure. Are there models from other cities you've seen where funding the work and support services of neighborhood associations has been deployed effectively?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think Kansas City, I think we're doing a good job of it. There are neighborhoods who, and I'll do a quick plug, shout out to Community Capital Fund, who is a small grant called Neighborhood Rising Fund Grant. It's a grant up to $3,000. They just announced the winners of those a couple of weeks ago. There are 29 neighborhood associations in Kansas City, Missouri. 16 of those were graduates from the Center for Neighborhoods program. And for some of them, it was the first time they got the grant. And these are community-led small mini grants to go back into their community and do a project or do work. So I think we're a good example. One of the places I love the most is out of Boston, the Mel King Institute. They have an incredible program working with neighborhood leaders. And then there's a project called Ujima, and I'm not sure if they're out of California or not. They have an incredible program that's working with neighborhoods as well. And Ujima's project is really kind of focused on neighborhood wealth. I would love to see that happen here in Kansas City through the Center for Neighborhoods, where they're kind of focusing on letting the neighborhood drive projects and development and then reinvesting that money back in the community. So I hope we are able one day to be able to do that here at the center.
So Dina, I'll jump back in here with the question. Sorry, Liz, because I've seen some chat. So if I understand correctly, the Center for Neighborhoods is primarily focused on KCMO neighborhoods. But I know we've got folks here from KCK and other places outside of KCMO. Are there a few resources in the wider community around the region that you might point people towards for their own neighborhoods if they're not able to take advantage of the Center for Neighborhoods?
Absolutely. We get calls about working over in KCK all the time. And because we're state funded, if we get a grant or if we get a donation that will help us to let us work in KCK, believe me, we're on it. Our partner organization in KCK is Livable Neighborhoods. Andrea Genero is the director over there. We've worked with Andrea on several projects. She is absolutely amazing, the work she does over there. Up north, there's NNIN, I think, Northland Neighborhood. We haven't worked with them directly, but I understand that they do good work as well. As far as Independence, Raytown, that we still consider that Kansas City, Missouri. We still have, that's our service area, again, because we're state funded. So if you're outside of Kansas City, Missouri, KCK, there's Livable. I don't know who else. If you're in a whole nother state, I would suggest you, look into maybe even your university, see if they have a university community partnership. UMKC, Center for Neighborhoods, we're not that unique, but there are still, other universities across the country who have the same sort of model.
So I had a question from myself, actually. So what are some ways that you recommend that residents, just individual people, start getting involved in their neighborhood more?
Again, find out when they meet. If you have a neighborhood association that's kind of dormant, look into resurrecting that. Maybe you're the person to resurrect your neighborhood association. It's not a lot involved. You can call the city of Kansas City, Missouri. Sarah Cecil is the neighborhood person that you talk to. You can, and again, I want to point out, we're not just neighborhood associations, but we also work with HOAs. So if you're a member of an HOA, you know, get involved with that. You know, I would say, again, be a good neighbor. Check in on the folks around you. You know, again, yeah, just be a good neighbor.
All right, that's it for the questions in the chat box. If anybody else has a question, oh wait, here we have one more. What are your thoughts about how neighborhoods enter the conversation about defunding the KCPD so that there might be a partnership with KCPD?
Okay, boy, Diane, thanks. What a hot button topic. So let me start out by saying this. The Center for Neighborhoods, we have a relationship with KCPD. In fact, Jason Cooley, which a lot of neighborhood leaders know and love, is on our advisory board. Jason has taught several of our classes. So when we do our health and safety piece for our leadership training, we always bring in someone from KCPD. We've had the social workers in to talk about the work that they were doing with KCPD in the neighborhoods. It is a tough topic, Diane, I've got to tell you, and I think you know that. We believe that you cannot police your way out of poverty. You cannot police your way out of some of these systemic issues that are happening in our community. I think the conversation needs to be had, not just at a higher level, but certainly at neighborhood levels when we're talking about defunding the police. I think there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding about what that is. And we certainly will provide the space for that to happen. Part of the work we're doing, we had a 3-part series called The Power of the Moment. And these are the type of issues that we're talking about, these tough, hard issues. And we're providing a platform for people to be open and honest, to have these kind of conversations. So I don't want to personally put my thoughts out there because who knows what would happen, but I will say that now's the time to have those conversations. And yes, we have partnered with the police and we do have a relationship, and we actually had Chief Smith on maybe last month to address what was happening in the city. So Diane, I'm going to get you when I see you, by the way. But thanks for that question. That was political, wasn't it? That I kind of skirted around that, didn't I?
You can always count on your friends to ask the hard questions.
I know.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Dina, for joining us today. This has been a great session, and I know that I've learned a lot, and I hope that our guests have as well. This was excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Eric. Thank you to all the folk who showed up over their lunch hour. I just thought it was going to be mostly family ongoing. Dina's going to be on TV, but all you guys who are here, thank you so much for spending time with me. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. And again, please support Center for Neighborhoods. If you want, send a letter to the chancellor, tell him of the good work we're doing. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us from our end as well. I appreciate you guys. I will be sending out a follow-up email. It probably won't be today, if I'm very honest. It'll probably be tomorrow, but the follow-up email will include a link to the video because we did record this, and so we're going to have this available on our YouTube channel that you can share with your neighborhoods, you can share with your neighbors. I will include contact information that Dina mentioned, as well as I'm going to find out Robert Wood Johnson's social determinants of health little zip code thing.
Good, yeah.
And I'll add that in there. I'll include the CFN website, some links to other neighborhood organizations and groups in the area. So you mentioned the KCK group and the Northland group. I'll find those too. We have a couple more events coming up this month. Next week, we have Ann Pye and Brian Crosser of the Urban Trail Co. that are going to join us and talk about the trail systems in the Kansas City area. We're calling it Into the Woods on Kansas City Trails for any of you who are Sondheim fans. And we also have a Women Plus virtual coffee coming up this month. We welcome anyone who is women, trans, femme, non-binary. Please come and join us for our virtual coffee. It's very informal. We really just want to talk to you about your biking or your neighborhood or whatever you want to do. We just get together and chat. I will include all of that information in that follow-up email as well. Thank you to each of you for joining us. We offer a special thanks to our funders. Let me share my screen again. Our funders at Health Forward, Enterprise Bank, Hall Family Foundation, My Sidewalk, the Shoemaker Family Foundation, and especially our members, donors, and sponsors from BikeWalkKC. You all make this possible. We appreciate your generosity, especially when it's especially challenging to be generous in these times. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate you being here with us today. I'll send out follow-up email tomorrow, and have a good afternoon.